Welcome to Soft Hour Library. Tonight's story begins now. Close your eyes and rest.
Chapter 3. Arrangements settled. Harris's method of doing work. How the elderly. Family man puts up a picture. George makes a sensible remark. Delights of early morning bathing. Provisions for getting upset. So, on the following evening, we again assembled to discuss and arrange our plans. Harris said, "Now, the first thing to settle is what to take with us. Now, you get a bit of paper and write down. Jay, and you get the grocery catalogue. George, and somebody give me a bit of pencil. And then I'll make out a list." That's Harris all over, so ready to take the burden of everything himself and put it on the backs of other people. He always reminds me of my poor Uncle Podger. You never saw such a commotion up and down a house in all your life as when my Uncle Podger undertook to do a job. A picture would have come home from the frame makers and be standing in the dining room, waiting to be put up, and Aunt Podger would ask what was to be done with it. And Uncle Podger would say, "Lo, you leave that to me. Don't you, any of you, worry yourselves about that. I'll do all that." And then he would take off his coat and begin. He would send the girl out a sixpenn'orth of nails, and then one of the boys after her to tell her what size to get. And from that, he would gradually work down and start the whole house. "Now you go and get me my hammer. Will," he would shout, "and you bring me the rule. Tom and I shall want the step ladder. And I had better have a kitchen chair, too, and the Jim, you run round to Mr. Goggles and tell him Pa's kind regards and hopes his leg's better, and will he lend him his spirit level, and don't you go. Maria, because I shall want somebody to hold me the light, and when the girl comes back, she must go out again for a bit of picture cord, and Tom, where's Tom? Tom, you come here, I shall want you to hand me up the picture." And then he would lift up the picture and drop it, and it would come out of the frame, and he would try to save the glass and cut himself, and then he would spring round the room looking for his handkerchief. He could not find his handkerchief because it was in the pocket of the coat he had taken off, and he did not know where he had put the coat, and all the house had to leave off looking for his tools and start looking for his coat while he would dance round and hinder them. Doesn't anybody in the whole house know where my coat is? I never came across such a set in all my life. Upon my word, I did. 6 of you, and you can't find a coat that I put down not 5 minutes ago. Of all the... Then he'd get up and find that he had been sitting on it and would call out, "Lo, you can give it up. I've found it myself now." Might just as well ask the cat to find anything as expect you people to find it. And when half an hour had been spent in tying up his finger, and a new glass had been got, and the tools, and the ladder, and the chair, and the candle had been brought, he would have another go. The whole family, including the girl and the charwoman, standing round in a semicircle, ready to help. 2 people would have to hold the chair, and a third would help him up on it. and hold him there, and a fourth would hand him a nail, and a fifth would pass him up the hammer, and he would take hold of the nail and drop it. There, he would say, in an injured tone, "Now the nail's gone." And we would all have to go down on our knees and grovel for it, while he would stand on the chair and grunt and want to know if he was to be kept there all the evening. The nail would be found at last, but by that time he would have lost the hammer. "Where's the hammer? What did I do with the hammer? Great heavens, 7 of you, gaping round there, and you don't know what I did with the hammer." We would find the hammer for him, and then he would have lost sight of the mark he had made on the wall, where the nail was to go in, and each of us had to get up on the chair beside him and see if we could find it, and we would each discover it in a different place. And he would call us old fools, one after another, and tell us to get down. And he would take the rule and remeasure and find that he wanted half 31 3/8 inches from the corner, and would try to do it in his head and go mad. And we would all try to do it in our heads and all arrive at different results and sneer at one another. And in the general row, the original number would be forgotten, and Uncle Podger would have to measure it again. He would use a bit of string this time, and at the critical moment, when the old fool was leaning over the chair at an angle of 45 and trying to reach a 0.3 inches beyond what was possible for him to reach, the string would slip, and down he would slide on to the piano, a really fine musical effect being produced by the suddenness with which his head and body struck all the notes at the same time. And Aunt Maria would say that she would not allow the children to stand round and hear such language. At last, Uncle Podger would get the spot fixed again and put the point of the nail on it with his left hand and take the hammer in his right hand. And, with the first blow, he would smash his thumb and drop the hammer with a yell on somebody's toes. Aunt Maria would mildly observe that next time Uncle Podger was going to hammer a nail into the wall, she hoped he'd let her know in time, so that she could make arrangements to go and spend a week with her mother while it was being done. "Oh, you women's, you make such a fuss over everything," Uncle Podger would reply, picking himself up. "Why, I like doing a little job of this sort." And then he would have another try. And at the second blow, the nail would go clean through the plaster, and half the hammer after it, and Uncle Podger be precipitated against the wall with force nearly sufficient to flatten his nose. Then we had to find the rule and the string again, and a new hole was made, and about midnight, the picture would be up, very crooked and insecure, the wall for yards round looking as if it had been smoothed down with a rake, and everybody dead beat and wretched except Uncle Podger. "There you are," he would say, stepping heavily off the chair on to the charwoman's corns, and surveying the mess he had made with evident pride. "Why, some people would have had a man in to do a little thing like that. Harris will be just that sort of man when he grows up. I know, and I told him so. I said I could not permit him to take so much labor upon himself. I said, No, you get the paper, and the pencil, and the catalogue, and George, write down, and I'll do the work. But the first list we made out had to be discarded. It was clear that the upper reaches of the Thames would not allow of the navigation of a boat sufficiently large to take the things we had set down as indispensable, so we tore the list up and looked at one another. George said, "You know we are on a wrong track altogether. We must not think of the things we could do with, but only of the things that we can't do without." But George comes out really quite sensible at times. You'd be surprised. I call that downright wisdom, not merely as regards the present case, but with reference to our trip up the river of life. Generally, how many people on that voyage load up the boat till it is ever in danger of swamping with a store of foolish things which they think essential to the pleasure and comfort of the trip, but which are really only useless lumber. How they pile the poor little craft mast-high with fine clothes and big houses, with useless servants, and a host of swell friends that do not care twopence for them, and that they do not care three halfpence for, with expensive entertainments that nobody enjoys, with formalities and fashions, with pretense and ostentation, and with, oh, heaviest, maddest lumber of all, the dread of what will my neighbor think, with luxuries that only cloy, with pleasures that bore, with empty show that, like the criminal's iron crown of yore, makes to bleed and swoon the aching head that wears it. It is lumber. Man, all lumber, throw it overboard. It makes the boat so heavy to pull. You nearly faint at the oars. It makes it so cumbersome and dangerous to manage. You never know a moment's freedom from anxiety and care. Never gain a moment's rest for dreamy laziness. No time to watch the windy shadows skimming lightly o'er the shallows, or the glittering sunbeams flitting in and out among the ripples, or the great trees by the margin looking down at their own image, or the woods all green and golden, or the lilies white and yellow, or the sombre waving rushes, or the sedges, or the orchis, or the blue forget-me-nots. Throw the lumber over. Man, let your boat of life be light, packed with only what you need, a homely home and simple pleasures, one or two friends, worth the name, someone to love and someone to love you, a cat, a dog, and a pipe or two, enough to eat and enough to wear, and a little more than enough to drink, for thirst is a dangerous thing. You will find the boat easier to pull then, and it will not be so liable to upset, and it will not matter so much if it does upset. Good. Plain merchandise will stand water. You will have time to think as well as to work, time to drink in life's sunshine, time to listen to the Aeolian music that the wind of God draws from the human heartstrings around us, time to. I beg your pardon. Really, I quite forgot. Well, we left the list to John, and he began it. We won't take a tent. Suggested George, we will have a boat with a cover. It is ever so much simpler and more comfortable. It seemed a good thought, and we adopted it. I do not know whether you have ever seen the thing I mean. You fix iron hoops up over the boat, and stretch a huge canvas over them, and fasten it down all round, from stem to stern, and it converts the boat into a sort of little house. And it is beautifully cozy, though a trifle stuffy, but there. Everything has its drawbacks, as the man said when his mother-in-law died, and they came down upon him for the funeral expenses. George said that in that case we must take a rug each, a lamp, some soap, a brush and comb between us, a toothbrush each, a basin, some tooth powder, some shaving tackle. Sounds like a French exercise, doesn't it? And a couple of big towels for bathing. I notice that people always make gigantic arrangements for bathing when they are going anywhere near the water, but that they don't bathe much when they are there. It is the same when you go to the seaside. I always determine, when thinking over the matter in London, that I'll get up early every morning and go and have a dip before breakfast. And I religiously pack up a pair of drawers and a bath towel. I always get red bathing drawers. I rather fancy myself in red drawers. They suit my complexion so. But when I get to the sea, I don't feel somehow that I want that early morning bathe nearly so much as I did when I was in town. On the contrary, I feel more that I want to stop in bed till the last moment, and then come down and have my breakfast. Once or twice virtue has triumphed, and I have got out at 6 and half-dressed myself, and have taken my drawers and towel, and stumbled dismally off. But I haven't enjoyed it. They seem to keep a specially cutting east wind, waiting for me. When I go to bathe in the early morning, and they pick out all the three-cornered stones, and put them on the top, and they sharpen up the rocks and cover the points over with a bit of sand so that I can't see them, and they take the sea and put it 2 miles out, so that I have to huddle myself up in my arms and hop, shivering, through 6 inches of water. And when I do get to the sea, it is rough and quite insulting. One huge wave catches me up and chucks me in a sitting posture, as hard as ever it can, down onto a rock which has been put there for me. And before I've said oh, and found out what has gone, the wave comes back and carries me out to mid-ocean. I begin to strike out frantically for the shore, and wonder if I shall ever see home and friends again, and wish I'd been kinder to my little sister when I was a boy. I mean, just when I have given up all hope, a wave retires and leaves me sprawling like a starfish on the sand, and I get up and look back and find that I've been swimming for my life in 2 feet of water. I hop back and dress, and crawl home, where I have to pretend I liked it. In the present instance, we all talked as if we were going to have a long swim every morning. George said it was so pleasant to wake up in the boat in the fresh morning and plunge into the limpid river. Harris said there was nothing like a swim before breakfast to give you an appetite. He said it always gave him an appetite. George said that if it was going to make Harris eat more than Harris ordinarily ate, then he should protest against Harris having a bath at all. He said there would be quite enough hard work in towing sufficient food for Harris up against stream. As it was, I urged upon George, however, how much pleasanter it would be to have Harris clean and fresh about the boat, even if we did have to take a few more hundredweight of provisions, and he got to see it in my light. and withdrew his opposition to Harris's bath. Agreed, finally, that we should take 3 bath towels, so as not to keep each other waiting. For clothes, George said 2 suits of flannel would be sufficient, as we could wash them ourselves. In the river, when they got dirty, we asked him if he had ever tried washing flannels in the river, and he replied, no. Not exactly himself like, but he knew some fellows who had. And it was easy enough, and Harris and I were weak enough to fancy he knew what he was talking about. And that 3 respectable young men, without position or influence, and with no experience in washing, could really clean their own shirts and trousers in the River Thames with a bit of soap. We were to learn in the days to come, when it was too late, that George was a miserable impostor who could evidently have known nothing whatever about the matter. If you had seen these clothes after, but, as the shilling shockers say, we anticipate, George impressed upon us to take a change of underthings and plenty of socks. In case we got upset and wanted a change, also plenty of handkerchiefs, as they would do to wipe things, and a pair of leather boots as well as our boating shoes, as we should want them if we got upset. Chapter 4. The Food Question. Objections to paraffine oil as an atmosphere. Advantages of cheese as a traveling companion. A married woman deserts her home. Further provision for getting upset. I pack. Cussedness of toothbrushes. George and Harris pack. Awful behavior of Montmorency. We retire to rest. Then we discussed the food question. George said, begin with breakfast. George is so practical. Now for breakfast, we shall want a frying pan. Harris said it was indigestible, but we merely urged him not to be an ass. And George went on, a teapot and a kettle, and a methylated spirit stove. No oils, said George, with a significant look, and Harris and I agreed. We had taken up an oil stove once, but never again. It had been like living in an oil shop that week. It oozed. I never saw such a thing as paraffine oil is to ooze. We kept it in the nose of the boat, and from there it oozed down to the rudder, impregnating the whole boat and everything in it on its way. And it oozed over the river, and saturated the scenery and spoilt the atmosphere. Sometimes a westerly oily wind blew, and at other times an easterly oily wind, and sometimes it blew a northerly oily wind, and maybe a southerly oily wind, but whether it came from the Arctic snows, or was raised in the waste of the desert sands, it came alike to us laden with the fragrance of paraffine oil. And that oil oozed up and ruined the sunset, and as for the moonbeams, they positively reeked of paraffine. We tried to get away from it at Marlow. We left the boat by the bridge and took a walk through the town to escape it. But it followed us. The whole town was full of oil. We passed through the churchyard, and it seemed as if the people had been buried in oil. The high street stunk of oil. We wondered how people could live in it. And we walked miles upon miles out Birmingham Way, but it was no use. The country was steeped in oil. At the end of that trip, we met together at midnight in a lonely field, under a blasted oak. and took an awful oath. We had been swearing for a whole week about the thing in an ordinary, middle-class way. But this was a swell affair, an awful oath never to take paraffine oil with us in a boat again, except, of course, in case of sickness. Therefore, in the present instance, we confine ourselves to methylated spirit. Even that is bad enough. You get methylated pie and methylated cake. But methylated spirit is more wholesome when taken into the system in large quantities than paraffine oil. For other breakfast things, George suggested eggs and bacon, which were easy to cook, cold meat, tea, bread and butter, and jam. For lunch, he said, we could have biscuits, cold meat, bread and butter, and jam but no cheese. Cheese, like oil, makes too much of itself. It wants the whole boat to itself. It goes through the hamper and gives a cheesy flavor to everything else there. You can't tell whether you are eating apple pie or German sausage, or strawberries and cream. It all seems cheese. There is too much odor about cheese. I remember a friend of mine buying a couple of cheeses at Liverpool. Splendid cheeses they were, ripe and mellow, and with a 200 horsepower scent about them that might have been warranted to carry 3 miles and knock a man over at 200 yards. I was in Liverpool at the time, and my friend said that if I didn't mind, he would get me to take them back with me to London, as he should not be coming up for a day or two himself, and he did not think the cheeses ought to be kept much longer. Though, with pleasure, dear boy, I replied, with pleasure. I called for the cheeses and took them away in a cab. It was a ramshackle affair, dragged along by a knock-kneed, broken-winded somnambulist, which his owner, in a moment of enthusiasm, during conversation, referred to as a horse. I put the cheeses on the top, and we started off at a shamble that would have done credit to the swiftest steamroller ever built, and all went merry as a funeral bell, until we turned the corner. There, the wind carried a whiff from the cheeses full on to our steed. It woke him up, and, with a snort of terror, he dashed off at 3 miles an hour. The wind still blew in his direction, and before we reached the end of the street, he was laying himself out at the rate of nearly 4 miles an hour, leaving the cripples and stout old ladies simply nowhere. It took 2 porters as well as the driver to hold him in at the station, and I do not think they would have done it. Even then, had not one of the men had the presence of mind to put a handkerchief over his nose and to light a bit of brown paper. I took my ticket and marched proudly up the platform with my cheeses, the people falling back respectfully on either side. The train was crowded, and I had to get into a carriage where there were already 7 other people. One crusty old gentleman objected, but I got in, notwithstanding, and, putting my cheeses upon the rack, squeezed down with a pleasant smile, and said it was a warm day. A few moments passed, and then the old gentleman began to fidget. Very close in here, he said, quite oppressive. said the man next him, and then they both began sniffing. And at the third sniff, they caught it right on the chest, and rose up without another word and went out. And then a stout lady got up and said it was disgraceful that a respectable married woman should be harried about in this way, and gathered up a bag and 8 parcels and went. The remaining 4 passengers sat on for a while, until a solemn-looking man in the corner, who, from his dress and general appearance, seemed to belong to the undertaker class, said it put him in mind of dead baby, and the other 3 passengers tried to get out of the door at the same time, and hurt themselves. I smiled at the black gentleman, and said I thought we were going to have the carriage to ourselves, and he laughed pleasantly, and said that some people made such a fuss over a little thing. But even he grew strangely depressed after we had started. And so, when we reached Crewe, I asked him to come and have a drink. He accepted, and we forced our way into the buff, where we yelled and stamped and waved our umbrellas for a quarter of an hour, and then a young lady came and asked us if we wanted anything. "What's yours?" I said, turning to my friend. "I'll have half a crown's worth of brandy." "Nate, if you please." "Miss," he responded, and he went off quietly after he had drunk it and got into another carriage, which I thought mean. From Crewe, I had the compartment to myself, though the train was crowded. As we drew up at the different stations, the people, seeing my empty carriage, would rush for it. "Here, why are Maria, come along. Plenty of room." "All right. Tom will get in here." They would shout, and they would run along, carrying heavy bags, and fight round the door to get in first. And one would open the door and mount the steps, and stagger back into the arms of the man behind him, and they would all come and have a sniff, and then droop off and squeeze into other carriages, or pay the difference and go first. From Euston, I took the cheeses down to my friend's house. When his wife came into the room, she smelt round for an instant. Then she said, "What is it? Tell me the worst." I said, "It's cheeses. Tom bought them in Liverpool and asked me to bring them up with me." And I added that I hoped she understood that it had nothing to do with me, and she said that she was sure of that, but that she would speak to Tom about it when he came back. My friend was detained in Liverpool longer than he expected, and 3 days later, as he hadn't returned home, his wife called on me. She said, "What did Tom say about those cheeses?" I replied that he had directed they were to be kept in a moist place, and that nobody was to touch them. She said, "Nobody's likely to touch them." Had he smelt them? I thought he had, and added that he seemed greatly attached to them. "You think he would be upset?" She queried if I gave a man a sovereign to take them away and bury them. I answered that I thought he would never smile again. An idea struck her. She said, "Do you mind keeping them for him? Let me send them round to you." "Madam," I replied, "for myself, I like the smell of cheese, and the journey the other day with them from Liverpool I shall ever look back upon as a happy ending to a pleasant holiday. But in this world, we must consider others. The lady under whose roof I have the honor of residing is a widow. And, for all I know, possibly an orphan too. She has a strong, I may say an eloquent, objection to being what she terms put upon. The presence of your husband's cheeses in her house she would, I instinctively feel, regard as a put upon, and it shall never be said that I put upon the widow and the orphan. But very well, then, said my friend's wife, rising, all I have to say is that I shall take the children and go to an hotel until those cheeses are eaten. I decline to live any longer in the same house with them. But she kept her word, leaving the place in charge of the charwoman, who, when asked if she could stand the smell, replied, "What smell and who?" When taken close to the cheeses and told to sniff hard, said she could detect a faint odor of melons. It was argued from this that little injury could result to the woman from the atmosphere, and she was left. The hotel bill came to 15 guineas, and my friend, after reckoning everything up, found that the cheeses had cost him 8 and sixpence a pound. He said he dearly loved a bit of cheese, but it was beyond his means, so he determined to get rid of them. He threw them into the canal, but had to fish them out again. As the bargemen complained, they said it made them feel quite faint. And after that, he took them one dark night and left them in the parish mortuary. But the coroner discovered them and made a fearful fuss. He said it was a plot to deprive him of his living by waking up the corpses. My friend got rid of them, at last, by taking them down to a seaside town and burying them on the beach. It gained the place quite a reputation. Visitors said they had never noticed before how strong the air was, and weak-chested and consumptive people used to throng there for years afterwards, fond as I am of cheese. Therefore, I hold that George was right in declining to take any. We shan't want any tea, said George. Harris's face fell at this, but we'll have a good round. Square, slap up meal at 7, dinner, tea, and supper combined. But Harris grew more cheerful. George suggested meat and fruit pies, cold meat, tomatoes, fruit, and green stuff. For drink, we took some wonderful sticky concoction of Harris's, which you mixed with water and cold lemonade, plenty of tea, and a bottle of whiskey, in case, as George said, we got upset. It seemed to me that George harped too much on the getting upset idea. It seemed to me the wrong spirit to go about the trip in. But I'm glad we took the whiskey. We didn't take beer or wines. They are a mistake up the river. They make you feel sleepy and heavy. A glass in the evening when you are doing a mouch round the town and looking at the girls is all right enough, but don't drink when the sun is blazing down on your head and you've got hard work to do. We made a list of the things to be taken, and a pretty lengthy one it was, before we parted that evening. The next day, which was Friday, we got them all together and met in the evening to pack. We got a big Gladstone for the clothes and a couple of hampers for the victuals and the cooking utensils. We moved the table up against the window, piled everything in a heap in the middle of the floor, and sat round and looked at it. I said I'd pack. I rather pride myself on my packing. Packing is one of those many things that I feel I know more about than any other person living. It surprises me myself sometimes how many of these subjects there are. I impressed the fact upon George and Harris and told them that they had better leave the whole matter entirely to me. They fell into the suggestion with a readiness that had something uncanny about it. George put on a pipe and spread himself over the easy chair, and Harris cocked his legs on the table and lit a cigar. This was hardly what I intended. What I had meant, of course, was that I should boss the job, and that Harris and George should potter about under my directions, I pushing them aside every now and then with, "Though, you here, let me do it." There you are. Simple enough, really teaching them. As you might say, their taking it in the way they did irritated me. There is nothing does irritate me more than seeing other people sitting about doing nothing when I'm working. I lived with a man once who used to make me mad that way. He would loll on the sofa and watch me doing things by the hour together, following me round the room with his eyes. Wherever I went, he said it did him real good to look on at me, messing about. He said it made him feel that life was not an idle dream to be gaped and yawned through, but a noble task, full of duty and stern work. He said he often wondered now how he could have gone on before he met me, never having anybody to look at while they worked. Now, I'm not like that. I can't sit still and see another man slaving and working. I want to get up and superintend, and walk round with my hands in my pockets, and tell him what to do. It is my energetic nature. I can't help it. However, I did not say anything, but started the packing. It seemed a longer job than I had thought it was going to be, but I got the bag finished at last, and I sat on it and strapped it. "Ain't you going to put the boots in?" said Harris. And I looked round and found I had forgotten them. That's just like Harris. He couldn't have said a word until I'd got the bag shut and strapped. Of course. And George laughed, one of those irritating, senseless, chuckle-headed, crack-jawed laughs of his. They do make me so wild. I opened the bag and packed the boots in, and then, just as I was going to close it, a horrible idea occurred to me. Had I packed my toothbrush, I don't know how it is, but I never do know whether I've packed my toothbrush. My toothbrush is a thing that haunts me when I'm traveling, and makes my life a misery. I dream that I haven't packed it, and wake up in a cold perspiration, and get out of bed and hunt for it. And in the morning, I pack it before I have used it, and have to unpack again to get it. And it is always the last thing I turn out of the bag, and then I repack and forget it, and have to rush upstairs for it at the last moment and carry it to the railway station, wrapped up in my pocket handkerchief. Of course, I had to turn every mortal thing out now. And, of course, I could not find it. I rummaged the things up into much the same state, that they must have been before the world was created, and when chaos reigned. Of course, I found George's and Harris's 18 times over, but I couldn't find my own. I put the things back one by one, and held everything up and shook it. Then I found it inside a boot. I repacked once more. When I had finished, George asked if the soap was in. I said I didn't care a hang whether the soap was in or whether it wasn't, and I slammed the bag to and strapped it, and found that I had packed my tobacco pouch in it, and had to reopen it. It got shut up finally at 10. 5 p.m. And then there remained the hampers to do. Harris said that we should be wanting to start in less than 12 hours' time, and thought that he and George had better do the rest, and I agreed and sat down. And they had a go. They began in a light-hearted spirit, evidently intending to show me how to do it. I made no comment, I only waited. When George is hanged, Harris will be the worst packer in this world, and I looked at the piles of plates and cups, and kettles, and bottles and jars, and pies, and stoves, and cakes, and tomatoes, and sea, and felt that the thing would soon become exciting. It did. They started with breaking a cup. That was the first thing they did. They did that just to show you what they could do, and to get you interested. Then Harris packed the strawberry jam on top of a tomato and squashed it, and they had to pick out the tomato with a teaspoon. And then it was George's turn, and he trod on the butter. I didn't say anything, but I came over and sat on the edge of the table and watched them. It irritated them more than anything I could have said. I felt that. It made them nervous and excited, and they stepped on things, and put things behind them, and then couldn't find them when they wanted them, and they packed the pies at the bottom, and put heavy things on top, and smashed the pies in. They upset salt over everything. And as for the butter, I never saw two men do more with 1 and 2pence worth of butter in my whole life than they did. After George had got it off his slipper, they tried to put it in the kettle. It wouldn't go in, and what was in wouldn't come out. They did scrape it out at last, and put it down on a chair, and Harris sat on it, and it stuck to him, and they went looking for it all over the room. I'll take my oath I put it down on that chair, said George, staring at the empty seat. I saw you do it myself, not a minute ago, said Harris. Then they started round the room again looking for it, and then they met again in the center, and stared at one another. Most extraordinary thing I ever heard of, said George. So mysterious, said Harris. Then George got round at the back of Harris and saw it. Why, here it is all the time, he exclaimed, indignantly. Where? Cried Harris, spinning round. Stand still. Can't you? Roared George, flying after him. And they got it off, and packed it in the teapot. Montmorency was in it all. Of course, Montmorency's ambition in life is to get in the way and be sworn at. If he can squirm in anywhere where he particularly is not wanted, and be a perfect nuisance, and make people mad, and have things thrown at his head. Then he feels his day has not been wasted. To get somebody to stumble over him and curse him steadily for an hour is his highest aim and object, and when he has succeeded in accomplishing this, his conceit becomes quite unbearable. He came and sat down on things just when they were wanted to be packed, and he labored under the fixed belief that whenever Harris or George reached out their hand for anything, it was his cold, damp nose that they wanted. He put his leg into the jam, and he worried the teaspoons, and he pretended that the lemons were rats, and got into the hamper and killed 3 of them before Harris could land him with the frying pan. Harris said I encouraged him. I didn't encourage him. A dog like that don't want any encouragement. It's the natural, original sin that is born in him that makes him do things like that. The packing was done at 12:50, and Harris sat on the big hamper and said he hoped nothing would be found broken. George said that if anything was broken, it was broken, which reflection seemed to comfort him. He also said he was ready for bed. We were all ready for bed. Harris was to sleep with us that night, and we went upstairs. We tossed for beds, and Harris had to sleep with me. He said, "Do you prefer the inside or the outside?" Jay, I said I generally preferred to sleep inside a bed. Harris said it was old. George said, "What time shall I wake you fellows?" Harris said, 7. I said, "No, 6, because I wanted to write some letters." Harris and I had a bit of a row over it, but at last split the difference and said 6:30. Wake us at 6:30. George, we said. George made no answer, and we found, on going over, that he had been asleep for some time, so we placed the bath where he could tumble into it on getting out in the morning, and went to bed ourselves.